Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Tom Rogers, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Captain Mark Wilson. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by visitors to the memorial. If you are able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Private Cecil Frederick Boothman. Cecil Boothman was born on the 19th of December, 1871, the elder of two children born to Frederick and Louisa Boothman of Launceston, Tasmania. Following the death of Boothman's father in August 1890, Cecil Boothman became the chief breadwinner of the family and worked as an axeman to help provide for his widowed mother and young sister, Layla. While working, he also served for 2 years with a local Launceston volunteer militia unit. While he was in his 20s, Boothman moved to Melbourne, where he lived in a de facto relationship with a woman named Florence Mackay. The couple had 2 sons together, Archibald, born in 1903, and Leonard, born in 1904. By the beginning of the First World War, Florence and Boothman seem to have been separated. She lived in Perth with their 2 sons, while Boothman lived and worked in Sydney. Boothman enlisted into the Australian Imperial Force in early September 1914, only weeks after the outbreak of the Great War. Eligibility rules at the time stated that servicemen had to be between 19 and 38 years old. Boothman, who was 42 years old, gave his age as 36, so as to be allowed to serve. He soon began training with the 1st Infantry Battalion. This unit was raised within 2 weeks of the beginning of the war and would become one of the first Australian units to land on Gallipoli on the 25th of April, 1915. On the 18th of October, 1914, he sailed from Sydney aboard the troopship Afrique as part of the first convoy of ships to depart for service overseas. After stopping at Albany and Colombo, he arrived with the rest of his unit at Port Said on the Suez Canal in Egypt in early December 1914. On the 5th of December, his ship arrived at Alexandria, Egypt, where the troops were disembarked and began training in the hot desert conditions at Mina. Boothman, however, never made it to shore. At 2 p.m. on the 6th of December 1914, he died of influenza contracted while making the long journey from Australia. He never saw action in the Great War and was one of the first Australians to die overseas on overseas service in a conflict that would eventually cost over 62,000 Australian lives. He was 42 years old. Today, his remains lay buried at the Chapby Military and War Memorial Cemetery, Alexandria, Egypt, where over 2,250 Commonwealth servicemen of the First World War now lay. Private Cecil Frederick Boothman's name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. A photograph of his headstone is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Cecil Frederick Boothman, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age will not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them,
lest we forget.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening.